everybody, thank you for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today I'm going to talk about William T. VOLLMAN'S Poor People. This is 20 years after the publication of his first novel, which I discussed in a previous video, You Bright and Risen Angels. And leaping from 1987 to 2007, when this book was published, it roughly covers his travels and experiences with poverty from about 1990 to 2005. And just in case you aren't informed about this fellow, he is probably more traveled than, say, Barry Lopez. He has seemingly been everywhere, and many of these towns I had to look up myself. Though I'd heard of the country, he's not going to, necessarily the capitals or, well, more well-known places and so on. But I would definitely say that for a chronicle of poverty, or at least a book that portends towards such a thing, I would definitely say that his sample population is way more vast and universal than most books. The book is basically composed of William T. VOLLMAN'S interviews with poor people and his comments from his various interpreters, his copious research that underpins all of his nonfiction, most blatantly, but also of course informs his fiction as well. He's researching. He's got maybe every encyclopedia in the world at his disposal, because we have to remember he does not use the internet or email. His laptop is considered airlocked, which means it has never been connected to the internet. He once said that he tried to order something on Amazon one time, but as soon as it asked him for his email address, he, turned away from the whole operation. He doesn't want to be advertised to, and he is a big nut about privacy. There's actually a really interesting story behind his research assistant for Rising Up and Rising Down, and how they had to basically snail mail each other DVDs full of documents back and forth. I'll put the link below to that and some other links to some good interviews and insights into VOLLMAN. He also has copious literary excerpts and of course his own admirable critical thinking. All works together to create a patchwork chronicle of poor people throughout the world. Back in, I think, about 2016 or 2017, just a few years ago, I went on a missions trip to Haiti. As you can see, my shirt here, Haiti made. But it was a little different than just going in and feeding people or helping people build homes and so on. We weren't going to do any of that. So we had to take some classes to learn exactly how this trip was going to go and what was expected of us and so on. But in any case, they warned us about how the myth of the Great White Hope, as they call it, just doesn't work. Over the centuries, these Haitians, and other nations, of course, have seen these groups of white people come in, and the Great White Hope, and they're supposed to save them from their poverty and their bad situations and so on. And of course, it never happens. I mean, look at Haiti today, even before and after the earthquakes and so on. But what they wanted to press upon us was that poverty was a very, very relative concept. For us, they polled all of us and asked us what we thought poverty was. And of course, then when they put those against what local native Haitians said poverty was, there was quite a big chasm, which really opened my eyes. It's way more than just money or having basic means and so on. It has a lot to do with dignity. And hope hinges on dignity. Now, at the same time, there are very real circumstances in Haiti: corrupt government, lack of certain infrastructure that would certainly eliminate or cut down on disease and so on. But nonetheless, what we were actually going in to do was to just get to know them and to check out this organization at Ikondo, up in the mountains of Grand Guave, and see what they were doing. Now, unlike the Clintons, who did an amazing act of philanthropy and built bridges and parks and hydro parks and all this. It was a wonderful act and a great use of resources. However, they left out one thing. They didn't train the Haitians, the locals, on how to maintain those things. So within years, the bridges crumbled and collapsed, and the parks that were a good way of letting children have fun and generating filtered water and so on, just went into disuse. So that opened our eyes to seeing that the real way to help is not just to, pour out money on them, but to actually empower them to do things themselves, which they're more than happy to do in most cases. So this place at Ikondo, which I'll provide a link for, it was a hotel in a beautiful mountainside, and it was employing local Haitians to actually do all the work. So all the workers would be local Haitians, and this was to be like a luxury property where people would come in to Haiti and basically, pump money back into the economy and make it self-sustaining from the perspective of the locals. So it's a very respectable act, and I learned a lot from them and learned a lot from Haitians themselves. However, even though I had prepared myself by reading books on Haitian history and studying Haitian Creole, and which was basically, I had a leg up from my command of French. However, as one of the interpreters explained to me, to speak Haitian Creole, it's basically a very, very lazy French. So if you just get really slack with your pronunciation, kind of put a slur in there, you'll get close to it, is what he said. And most of the time I found that to be true. But nothing prepared me for the horrors that I saw at Port-au-Prince. When we flew in from the airport, we got picked up in a big econo van, no air conditioning, windows had to remain rolled up so people wouldn't throw things into the windows or reach in and take things from us. There was a long drive through a deeply rutted mud road out of the airport, and I remember on either side there were just people selling wares and fruits and so on that looked completely rotten and soiled. And then as we were navigating the streets around Port-au-Prince to finally get on a road up into the mountain, a horrible thunderstorm hit, and that basically put on display the fact that there is no sewage infrastructure in Haiti. There are no drains, there are no gutters, there's nothing to take care of the runoff that comes down from the mountain into Port-au-Prince. There are no, there's no dumpsters, no garbage receptacles. So what happens when there's a downpour like this, not only is the water levels compounded in Port-au-Prince at roughly sea level, but all of the runoff from the mountains is compounding. And because there's nowhere for people to put their trash, this basically creates rivers of filth and trash that just wash around the entire place. And there, in fact, there was one river that they call the River of Trash because it's so backed up with garbage that when it rains like that, the river just comes to a standstill because of the garbage. And riding through there in this van seemed to me like a virtual reality tour of this third world nation that I just could scarcely believe. And just seeing people, some country had done this whole initiative to provide clean drinking water. Well, to cut down on their costs, this country used these plastic baggies. They looked like Ziploc baggies. And the way that the Haitians would drink them is they would bite the corner of the plastic off, spit that piece out, drink the water, and then just toss the plastic sack on the ground because they weren't littering. There's nowhere to put that plastic. So part of this river of trash that gets washed around all the time is comprised of a lot of plastics. Once we got through the gridlock traffic and the flooding for about 3 hours. We had made it, I think, something like 5 miles in that time, and then we proceeded past a place called Cité Soleil, which is City of the Sun or Sun City, and this was the biggest, most sprawling ghetto I've ever seen in my life, and it was comprised almost exclusively of cardboard housing and some corrugated metal. But to see the children out there, you know, kicking trash around and smiling and having fun, then it put into stark contrast that for them this was normal. And the smell was so much so that one of the people with us on the van got extremely ill, and was nauseous and throwing up in a bag between her legs, and it took a good 24 hours for her to recover. And then when we got to the resort at a condo, every morning Haitians would come from their little villages and makeshift camps in the among the mountains and line up outside the door, hoping upon hope that they would get just even a little bit of money to do some kind of work there. So because of those experiences, and leaving that trip, realizing the vast gap that stood between myself and the poor of the world, with whom I had only really come into contact with in the streets of Washington, D.C., where I've spent a lot of time. My family is from just around there in Maryland. But, you know, those homeless, you know, it was still on home territory, and I didn't have to interact with them really at all. But this just brought a completely different perspective, because I was finally taken out of my normal circumstances and put in a foreign place. So I have a lot of respect for someone like William T. Vollmann. He willingly has gone all over the world into much scarier and impoverished places than even Port-au-Prince and Jacmel and other places in Haiti. So when it came to reading this book, the first time I tried to read it, I just couldn't, because the first thing I did was I looked through all the photographs that he includes at the end, and throughout the text it refers you to which photograph to look at. But just looking through the photographs alone and reading his introduction, I just knew I wasn't ready because of the sensitivity of the topic for me. The literary antecedent for this is James Agee, Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. And in the introduction, Vollmann tells you what sets his book apart from Agee's and points out, you know, the failures in the latter book. The structure of each of these chapters, it basically is comprised of 6 dimensions. First, Vollmann sets up the setting, and you know, he has that novelist's way of quickly making you feel like you were there with the sights and smells and sounds and so on. The second thing is he gives you the interview between himself and the various people. Then he brings in real data and research to bear on the information that he's sharing with you. Then he gives you his own observations, which, you know, with his mind and his insight, his experiences, his level of critical thinking, really underpin the whole thing and give it a lot of substance and an actual thrust forward instead of just meandering. And then he finally leaves each one by asking, what is poverty, and why are some people rich and some people poor? It seems sort of sad to say this about a book that is about poor people, but for some would-be readers, you may be thinking, why should I subject myself to that? Well, William T. Vollmann, he is a very, very good writer. No matter what he's writing, he just has the ability to craft such beautiful sentences and pick out just the right detail. I mean, like I said, he's got a novelist's eye for details. So, for example, when he's on a Japanese subway, he says, "A man sleeps. Even the pack of cigarettes in his breast pocket seems tired. It leans and sags like his lower lip. So just little things like that, like that you know, that eye for detail, but that also conveys just the mood and atmosphere of the place. He's got these very well-tuned suppositions. So he is able to take this whole mass of basically notebooks that he scribbled in during all these travels and create these links between what someone says here and this excerpt from a novel here and this entry from an encyclopedia here, this policy from the UN website, and bringing all those together and then finding a way to start poking holes in it, and provide his own questioning and suppositions from that data, that just show that he's not simply conveying a documentary of these experiences and what these people have to say, but he's also wrapping them in a philosophical framework. He widens gray areas to no avail. He's very, very honest and transparent, especially about himself and his own views and prejudices. But he's so honest that, I mean, he tells you this is not a practical book. This is in no way a treatise presenting a way to help out of this. You know, he wants to shed light on these problems and how these people really think and feel, and what exactly is that gap between rich and poor. He's got that classic sardonic wit that you'll come to love. I mean, this guy, he's really such a multifaceted guy. He's a great writer. He's a great researcher. He's a great critical thinker. He's he travels well. He works well with publishers. I can't tell you how many interviews I've read where people talk about just how nice he is and how unassuming. And that subtle humor will also come out in such minor things as his income table that he puts at the beginning. So he tries to show you a contrast of the daily incomes for the people, and he refers to them as daily incomes of people interviewed for this book. And if you look closely in here, you'll see that for USA in 1846, he lists Henry David Thoreau as a person interviewed. Now, of course, all throughout he's using Walden and Thoreau's time at Walden Pond, where he basically lived off of beans and said that anybody can be rich if they limit their material wants. But it's just funny that he said interviewed. Well, if you look at the first note for his sources for the income table, the very first one says Thoreau was interviewed by Ouija board, which is just in a book that's so serious and about such a critical topic. He still finds ways to insert some levity and just cause you to appreciate him and his character even more. After you have been taken all over the world and you have met a host of people of all stripes, all ilks, and you've heard what they have to say and what they have to live through, and he's shed light on things that you didn't even know about, or at least I didn't even know about, say the subway molestation problem that has been ongoing in Japan to the point where there are actually signs up warning against, and it actually says subway molesters. And they've got separate trains for women only to help mitigate this, and on and on and on. And after you've been through all this, and your empathy is either heightened for these people or completely broken, and you don't know where to stand. Chapter 21 is probably the best cap he could have put on this, because that chapter is entitled I Know I Am Rich, and it says that it takes place in USA in 2005. Now what this is Volman, is the I in I Am Rich, or I Know I Am Rich. And we get this insight that you may have heard about. Volman in Sacramento, in a bad neighborhood in Sacramento, he bought an old Mexican restaurant and retrofitted it to be his studio. And it also has a big parking lot that he owns, and he willfully allows homeless people to live there, and he's very friendly with them. and you know, he'll give them money, he'll give them some booze sometimes. You know, they're lighting up crack pipes in his in the parking lot just outside of where he's in there working, and they're defecating on the walls, and you know, more than a few of them are not very friendly towards him, and one tries to break in. Well, several try to break in, but he goes through all of this and his years of dealing with this, and bringing his young daughter to meet these people because he doesn't want her to grow up afraid of poor people and all this. But putting his perspective into the context of this book, inserting himself, this is a very strong chapter, if only because for me, I can relate to Volman so much better than all these other people, and his white American male dispositions coincide with mine, but his perspective really challenges me in a healthy way, and also leaves me in awe of how this man conducts his daily life, and how he doesn't live in fear. But this is the I was wondering how he was gonna sum up a book like this, and he is even completely honest about who the readers for this book even will be, despite the fact that he did take a lot of the advanced copies and hand them out to the homeless living in his parking lot. And he said, "I've been told that my books are difficult to read. If that is so, then my readers must be people who do not mind difficult books." And that is so true on so many levels. A lot of Volman's work is difficult to read, especially if you put it beside the latest bestseller. A lot of us do appreciate difficult reads, both in subject matter and the style of the book. That's been the same pretty much with all of his books, and he talks about how he could have just written very simply, but that's just not what he does. So in the end, you have a book that is comprised of this basically lengthy collection of long essays from all of his travels and meetings with people of poverty. Then a thick layer of sources, which shows his meticulousness when it comes to research, and then all of the photos of people that he came into contact with for this book. It's a wonderful book if one can say that something on a topic like this can be wonderful. The only other thing that amazes me is how his publisher kept his manuscript down to such a short length. Volman is notorious for putting out huge books and arguing with editors that, you know, not to cut any of it. So I don't know what the story is there. Maybe like the ice shirt and a couple of other small ones, you know, this is all he wanted to do. Because if we look at something like Imperial, which is a massive tome, you know, on roughly the same subject matter, we would expect this to be a lot bigger. But for its brevity, it is thereby much more concentrated, and thereby, I would say, much more effective and accessible for people who aren't already on the Volman bandwagon. So in the end, this is a huge success, a book that everyone should read, because as he points out early on, the United Nations does have a human poverty index, the UNHPI. You can look it up. It uses a multi-dimensional index matrix to rate and judge the index of poverty, and Volman takes that and then extends it to include some additional dimensions, and those are what drive this book. So if you haven't read it, I recommend it, and if you have, let me know what you think of it.